There are business leaders that are making so much more than profit in their enterprises. They're elevating their businesses, teams, and themselves to add more value. And so can you. Welcome to the Chris Cooper Business Elevation Show with host Chris Cooper. If you are looking for ways to elevate success while contributing to a better world, you'll want to listen in for the next hour. Now here's your host, Chris Cooper.
Hi, this is Chris Cooper, and a huge welcome to you all listening to the Business Elevation Show today. And it's always a pleasure to be here. And it's a special pleasure today. It's actually the 9th birthday on Monday of the show. So I've been doing this weekly for 9 years. And it seems, when I reflect upon it, so apt. You know, when I set up this show, I wanted to add value to over 1 million people beyond my clients. And I wanted to help them to raise their consciousness and help us all to raise our consciousness, and myself in doing that. And therefore today, it just seems such an appropriate time to have a fantastic guest today, Tom Campbell, to talk about elevating business consciousness. And before I do that, I want to say a big thank you to my guest last week, Andy Cope, who was the doctor of happiness. He has a PhD in happiness, and we talked about being brilliant. And there were some tremendous ideas there about how to shift your state from being the norm, as people tend to be in terms of their mood, to being energized, being somebody who connects with people, who's enthusiastic and passionate, and spreads light and spreads energy wherever they go. So if you're interested in being brilliant and happiness, do listen to the interview last week with Andy Cope. So today, an elevating business consciousness with Tom Campbell. Now, one of the things Tom says is that wisdom resides more in the heart and soul than the intellect. And I therefore have an intellectual kind of beginning to this, but I also just want to share a little bit from the heart too. Now, to give you some background on Tom, in 2004, scientist and professional physicist Tom Campbell predicted that if the planet suffers much more damage, then Mother Nature would get even. And boy, hasn't it? We're facing at the moment monumental business and world changes. And I think Tom's trilogy, My Big Toe, which stands for My Big Picture Theory of Everything, is incredible. It provides some amazing insights and some solutions, and represents the results and conclusions of lots and lots of scientific exploration of the boundaries and contents of reality from both physical and metaphysical viewpoints. But from a personal perspective, what does that mean? Well, myself, I've been around self-development for many, many years, and obviously I think interviewed something like 380 guests on this show. But I have found this work to be, for me, very, very enlightening. It's helping me to understand the bigger picture of my work and life, and how significant or insignificant I am within that. It's also helped me actually to think about the death of my father as well, and what that means, and my own death one day. And there are just so many questions and thoughts and ideas that are coming out of Tom's work. Now, Tom is a physicist. He spent 10 years working as a senior analyst in military technical intelligence, 20 years developing US missile defense systems, before spending a period of time as an expert consultant generating complex risk analysis for NASA. In parallel with this, he spent over 45 years now as a consciousness researcher, properties, boundaries, and abilities of consciousness. So he's got an incredible background, and I think an unusual one, a background of a physicist, and somebody who is also looking at the bigger picture and trying to answer the context to which we live in and what is really important in this world. So today is going to be, I think, fascinating. I'd also like to thank my good friend Jessica Richards, who's an expert in resolving unhelpful limiting beliefs and fears, because she told me about Tom's work, and I could see how passionate she was about it, and the network that Tom has created and his team to share this fascinating work. I'd also recommend the interview with Jessica Richards. You can go into the archive on the show and access that, because that was a brilliant show too. So I warn you, if you really start to get into Tom's work, it's akin to deciding whether to take the red pill or the blue pill. there's some truths in there that are hard to handle, but also others that are revelationary. But you've got to be up for that. If you're not up for that, if you're not up for self-growth, then this isn't for you. And you've got to raise your awareness and face into the mind-bending surprises or remain blissfully ignorant. That's your choice. Tom often says, be open and be skeptical. So that's both. You can be open and be skeptical. So that's the recommendation. And just to be clear, Tom has an enormous amount of work online. There are videos, interviews with Tom. There's a wonderful series with Tom and Bruce Lipton. So go and access all of that content. We can't cover the entire theory of reality within just an hour. So there we go. I'd like to say a big welcome to my guest today, our 9th anniversary, Tom Campbell.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. It's my privilege to be here and spend this hour with you, talking about business and whatever else comes up.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think we've got to find out today, and we've got a part 2 to this interview as well, coming up on the 25th of September. But I want to find out a bit about you, Tom, and your background and inspiration from that. And I'm sort of interested to start, really. Where did this passion for science come from that has led to you to an incredible place? You've worked for NASA. That's pretty amazing, really.
Well, it started very early. I came into this world very right-brained. That means kind of a holistic viewpoint, big picture. And I had a drive to become left brain, to balance that right brain dominance that I came in with. So I was a young boy at 4 or 5 or 6 who would kind of go off and sit by myself and chant. That's how right-brained I was. But I had this knowledge, I had this feeling, this drive to understand everything. And my big question was why? I'm sure I drove my parents near insanity with why. How does this work? Why? And I was a child that took everything apart and hopefully, mostly put it back together again. I wanted to know, how does the flashlight work? How does the light bulb work? How does the radio work? By the time I was probably 7, I had made my first crystal radio and was listening into shortwave with a little set of headphones. So I've always been right-brained and kind of a generalist and big picture thinker, but at the same time, I was driven to become a physicist because physics is the fundamental understanding, the fundamental modeling of reality. And to me, that was the core question. What is this reality and how does it work and why does it work that way? So I started out kind of knowing what it is I wanted to do and what it is I wanted to become. And I didn't really change that from a very young age. So that is what I have done. So it just kind of came in as an innate drive to me to be a scientist and also study consciousness.
So is this where a lot of people, when they get to that age and they stop asking why, their parents sort of almost knock it out of them because they're so frustrated with it? You've continued that why, and you're still doing it.
Absolutely. Never quit.
And you've written an incredible trilogy. I'm looking at it on my desk. It's getting a bit dog-eared now because it kind of follows me around in my hand around the house, and I keep sort of dipping into it and trying to study it. And it within it, you explain that you had some sort of unusual kind of metaphysical experiences from a young age, and then you had a really major paradigm shift at university whilst you were studying physics. And I wonder if you could, share that story for us in sound bites, really.
Okay, well, I'll try to make it very short. When I was probably 5, 6, 7 years old, in that range, I went out of body. Actually, I had some entity show up to me, and in my world, that was in a dream, and helped me go out of body. And I drifted up out of my body and was floating around in my bedroom and realized that with my intention, I could make it go the way I wanted. So I slipped out through the wall and went down into the neighborhood and explored, my yard, and I found that I could go right through bushes and didn't actually run into them. And I spent then the next bunch of nights after that exploring out of body. And I knew that it was more than a dream because I would see things like the milkman. Now, I'm 75 years old, so when I was young, milkman came to people's houses and delivered milk to their front porch. And I saw this truck stop in front of my house while I was outside, out of body. And the driver got out of the truck and went around and got some cartons of milk. And he was carrying these things up, put them on the porch, and went back into his truck and drove away. And I thought, well, gee, that's interesting. I never knew that's how milk ended up on the front porch because I'm maybe 5 years old or 6 years old. I didn't understand much of what happened in the larger reality. And when I asked my family or told them about that, they said, of course, yes, a truck comes and gets delivered. And I said, yes, I saw it. And of course, they thought I saw it by looking out of a window, but it was dark out because that milkman came before the sun came up. And I had seen it from an out-of-body state. And I very quickly realized that that was something you just keep to yourself because other people don't understand. So from then on, I did not share any of that, but I continued to experience. So that was me at a very young age. Again, that right-brained, open, intuitive part found out-of-body to be kind of a natural thing. And, it's not that unusual. A lot of children in that age group have spontaneous out-of-bodies. I thought it was a dream at first, but it was a dream in which I could see things that actually happened, which was a little strange. But later, many years later, I realized, well, that was what is classically called an out-of-body experience. Now, when I was at the university, in graduate school, I took a meditation course. It was transcendental meditation, special rate for students, and it would enable me to get by with less sleep. That's what I wanted. But when I started the meditating, I found out it was unnatural. I just sunk right into that meditation state almost instantly, and time would go by and I would have no recollection of it. So I had an immediate connection with meditation. And I found that in a meditation state, I could debug my software. Now, this is back in the old Neanderthal days of computers and software. So I had boxes of cards, and each box of cards, I think, had something like 1,000 or 2,000 cards in a box. And I had 4, 5, 6 boxes of these cards. And of course, you had to punch all these cards first before you read them into the computer. And in those days, there was no error correcting codes. There was no way for you to work on it online. You'd put in a job and it would just come back, and either it ran or it didn't. And you didn't have any idea why not. All you know is it last printed here and then quit. So debugging was pretty hard in those days. And I found I could bring up in my mind the printout. I could scroll through the listing of my code that I got from the computer. And those lines that were okay were black, and the ones that were problems were red. And I just would scroll by and, there'd be a red line. I'd back it up. I'd look at that red line and I'd say, okay, I'll remember that because I wrote all those lines of code. It was all my doing to write the code. So I was familiar with every line, and I'd go back then and check that. And sure enough, that's where a problem was. And sometimes those problems were subtle, like a card punch error. All the code was exactly right, but the card punch machine had made the hole just a little off center and it wasn't reading. And I'd get those too. So that was a big, big paradigm shift for me because as a physicist, I'm now, probably 75% of my way through graduate school already toward getting a PhD. And I realized that reality is a whole lot bigger than I thought it was. As physicists, we have what's called what's the word for that? Anyway, it's the definition of reality is if you can measure it, then it's real. If there's something you cannot measure, In other words, there's no way you can interact with it. Then it's either not real or it's irrelevant. So reality is only that stuff that you can interact with. That's reality. And now I found that I could debug my software in my mind. And that software was a hard physical thing. My mind, not so much. And that told me that there was more to reality than the physical. And now, so I'm in my mid-20s or so, mid to late 20s when this happened. And I continued with my meditation because I was fascinated with the possibilities. And I played with things that I could do with my mind. And eventually I met Bob Monroe, and he had a laboratory for studying consciousness. And I volunteered to be a scientist in his lab. And that started my career in consciousness research, which was just about the same time I left graduate school. So both of my careers, the one in physics and the one in conscious research, started at just about the same time.
I mean, this is absolutely fascinating to me. I remember having a good friend a number of years ago talked about her out of body experiences and the sort of detail of what came through. And I have to be honest, it was a little bit of me wasn't sure whether she was slightly bonkers. And I wonder, and we'll talk more in the second segment about belief systems, but you talk about being open yet being skeptical. And the more I thought about this and read your book, the more I thought about actually the different experiences in my life where, what I thought was reality and became blurred. My children both independently talked about seeing a little girl in the house. We've got an old house, and I've had taps on the shoulder in the walking. Both my wife and I have walking down the drive, and when I thought about it, I had so many experiences in my life that I tried to rationalize as put aside without realizing actually there is a bigger perspective that maybe we don't understand, and maybe I'm just a small cog in the wheel.
Yeah, well, that's the price of having a belief. When we believe that these things are impossible because they conflict with what we believe about the world. We believe the world is materialistic and deterministic, and that mind is an artifact of matter, that the brain creates consciousness. And when we have this worldview that really doesn't allow things like taps on the shoulder or, children in the room who aren't seen by anybody but your children, then we tend to dismiss it. We just say, that's just kind of random neuron firing or a hallucination or active imagination, and we just blow it off. So data comes in, it conflicts with what we believe, so we throw that data out. We justify it as nonsense. And that is the problem with all belief. When you believe something, then what you believe in your own mind becomes fact. And things that are not explained by that fact, things that are contrary to that fact, get brushed off. So we just only pay attention to the world that is in consonance with our beliefs. So a belief that these things can't possibly exist means that you don't ever deal with them, even if you experience them. I've been told that an independent survey of people asking them, have you ever experienced anything paranormal, comes out to close to 80% of the people saying yes. But I suspect that if you were in a group of people, particularly their peers and particularly at work, most of that 80% would probably deny it because it's not seen as something that smart, rational people would say.
I think it's, what do you think about in a business sort of context for people as well? There's often so much more going on than we appreciate. And I think in business, we realize that synchronicity, it's just fascinating how you can be thinking of somebody or something and they call you, or as I found with my book, I remember when I was going to get my book published, my co-author said to me, what books do you love? behind you, because you've got lots of books on your shelf. And I pulled 3 out, and they were all published by Piatkus Books. And he said, should we approach Piatkus Books? I said, you're not going to believe this. I met Judy Piatkus last week, and I've got a card next to my computer. And then you sit in coaching sessions with people, and there's an energy and there's a feeling when you walk in the room. There is so much more, isn't there, that we don't fully appreciate. And I'm interested to know, Tom, you are a very, very robust, very experienced and acclaimed physicist. You work for NASA, for example. And I would just wonder, there are physicists out there and scientists who are doing lots of experiments to justify kind of reality. And then there's a whole group of people who, maybe, more moving into the realms that we talked about. And one's often seen as being a bit flaky, and the other one's seen as being scientific. And I just wonder, how important is it? Because you're unusual that these are combined to get the bigger picture.
Well,
Does it make sense?
It is very important that you do interdisciplinary study. If you stuck in one discipline, like just physics or just psychology or just chemistry or something like that, your viewpoint is very narrow, and you tend to take on the beliefs that are core to that discipline. Like in physics, core belief is this is a material reality, and that anything else is a product of that material reality. With those beliefs, then there's a certain amount of things you just won't see. They'll be right there in front of you, but you can't see them. And I had a dual career in conscious research and in physics. And I did very well at both of those careers. I seemed to was very successful at both of those careers. But the unique insights that I've written about could not have happened in any other way, except that I was working in both consciousness and physics at the same time. The work that I've done basically solves the outstanding fundamental paradoxes in physics and metaphysics. Okay. Well, it turns out that solving these paradoxes just needed a new perspective. It's just that if we look at it from our beliefs, we'll see one thing. If we can get rid of those beliefs, we'll see something entirely different. So also these paradoxes weren't just, physics and metaphysics, metaphysics being what? Epistemology, ontology, and cosmology, knowledge, being, and where do we come from? But also in biology, psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, even theology and others, things that are fundamental that are just, we know that's the way they are, but we don't know why. And just having this perspective that I gathered by mixing studies of consciousness and physics, solutions to these paradoxes just fell out. And it was as much a surprise to me as anybody that would happen.
I thought when I was reading your book, there was a section in there where you explain some of these paradoxes. Do you want to give us a couple of examples of paradoxes? Like how the universe was formed. I thought.
Well, yes, there's lots of paradoxes out there. Yeah, how the universe was formed. So we have a Big Bang theory. That Big Bang theory just says it all started when a very small, very high pressure, very high temperature little ball of plasma called the beginning. And that went bang, which means it expanded according to the rules, rules being gravity and pressure and, the science we call physics for the most part, how things interact. And then we had, as this stuff expanded, it cooled. As it cooled, it solidified. We ended up with suns and planets, a universe. And then as evolution perked along, we end up with us. So that's kind of the basic beginning story that physics has. But you have to ask the question, where did that ball of plasma come from? You see, because the physical world, our universe, our physical universe didn't exist yet. So it couldn't have been a part of our physical universe. It was what? And for a while they thought, well, maybe there's also the Big Bang and the big contraction, that it all goes out and becomes suns and a universe, then it all contracts back into a ball of plasma and then bang, and it just keeps doing that. But physicists realized, and they came to experimental evidence that told them that no, that wasn't the case. It's not going to come back into what they called the big crunch. Matter of fact, it's still accelerating its expansion. And that acceleration will go on forever. It's accelerating in its growth. I'm talking about our universe is accelerating. Its volume is growing bigger and bigger and faster and faster as time goes on. So there's nothing that's going to turn it around and make it come back. It's not going to stop and then come back the other way. That's just not the way our universe works. And science just comes up with dark matter and dark energy and other sorts of things to explain this. But in any case, that's one of them. Another one is, why is the speed of light a constant? Another one is, why should probability distributions be the best way to describe particles? In quantum physics, in quantum physics, we don't talk about particles, little chunks of mass, say with charge like an electron. We talk about probability. A particle only exists as probability. And then when we make a measurement, that particle pops into view within this reality. Well, that sounds pretty mystical, but it isn't. It's just the nature of reality and how reality works. So those sorts of things. There's also mysteries in biology. All sorts of things. Physics has dozens of them. Where does time come from? Where does space come from? Where does mass and charge? Where are all these basic things that are in physics? Where do they come from? Well, physics just says, well, we don't know. They just are. They just exist. Well, that's not very satisfying, and with my understanding, then all of these things can be derived from first principles. Yes, of course, our particles aren't really particles. They're just probability distributions until they're measured. That's the nature of our reality. And of course, the speed of light has to be a constant. It couldn't be anything else, because that's the fastest that you can move from one pixel to another within information space. So in any case, all these paradoxes just fall right apart and make themselves accessible to deductive logic once you have the right perspective about the nature of reality. And that perspective is that our reality is information-based, not matter-based.
Well, we've got to go. Absolutely fascinating this. We've got to go to commercial break very shortly. And there's loads more paradoxes in the book, and the ones on biology, I think, we don't really understand why people have thoughts going through their heads, and emotions, anger, sadness, fear, hurt. Where do they all come from scientifically? There are just so many different paradoxes, and what you've done in your trilogy is take this apart and help people to gain a sense of what this bigger picture is. And I think a conclusion I took from that as well, from your book, and you suggest it, is that maybe we're just a very, very tiny little piece in the entire system. So we're going to go to commercial break now, and after the commercial break, we're going to have lots more exploration with Tom Campbell. Do join us in just a couple of minutes.
From the boardroom to you, Voice America Business Network.
Would you like to work personally with the host of this show to help realize your potential? Chris Cooper supports business leaders and high potential individuals to achieve greater success in their businesses and careers. Support includes the opportunity to join a high return group mentoring and mastermind program called the Achiever Program. One-to-one mentoring and coaching, facilitated leader development workshops and speeches. Email info@bemoreachievemore.com to arrange a free, no-obligation consultation to see how Chris and his team can help you.
Have you become a member yet? Sign up now to become a member of Voice America. It's always free and easy. Plus, you get to take advantage of some great member benefits. Get unlimited access to millions of hours of on-demand content across all of our channels. Keep track of your favorite episodes, shows, and hosts in your own customizable library. Find out what shows you might be interested in based on your favorites. Plus, you get insider access with our newsletter. Membership gives you more. Sign up at voiceamerica.com and click register at the top right.
From the boardroom to you, Voice America Business Network.
You are tuned into the Business Elevation Show with your host, Chris Cooper. If you have a question or comment about our show, please direct your emails to chris@chriscooper.co.uk. That's chris@chriscooper.co.uk. Now back to Chris Cooper.
Hi, this is Chris Cooper. I'm with Tom Campbell, and we're talking about elevating business consciousness. And I do hope that this first section has started to do that for you, because it's, for me, I'm tingling actually with this conversation and thinking about what it really means and the bigger perspective of it. And in the introduction, Tom, I did explain that when you wrote your book, and I think it was about 2004, that you explained in it that Mother Nature would get its own back, because of the destructive potential power that we have as human beings, and once it starts to impact her capacity to regenerate. And I just wonder, is that what is happening right now?
Well, yes, it is. Right now we have more than one crisis, going on at a time here. COVID is the one that's up front and present. That's probably the least of our problems. Something bigger would say is global warming, which seems to have longer and deeper issues and problems. But the basic thing, Chris, is that choices have consequences. And if we make our choices within a small picture of reality, that's that little materialistic, deterministic viewpoint, if we make choices within that small picture of reality, we're going to be blind to most of these consequences. The smallest reality that we have is self-centeredness, right? That's when you're the smallest reality. It's just about you, only about you. And then you can maybe have a little bigger picture where it's your family, and then maybe your business or your community, your country, your world. You may even care about your solar system, and that meteorites may come through and run into us. So beyond that physical, there's also another whole set of things that is the realm of consciousness, what we might say the inner world. If the physical world's the outer world, then consciousness is the inner world. And there you have things that are not objective, but subjective. Things like love, justice, beauty, truth, compassion, empathy, morality, caring, emotion, fear. All of these things exist beyond the objective physical world, but they're all very, very important. And they all expand the size of our reality. All of those things are expanding our consciousness, our sense of what's real. So as the reality you operate in grows, your decision space grows and your perspective grows within it. Also, your potential to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem grows as well. So yes, we're experiencing now the results of our not so expansive choices that don't see beyond our own greed, our own need for resources, our own need to survive and succeed in a little picture. But the bigger picture has consequences in it as well. So yes, we're seeing the results of poor choices made earlier, and we can continue down that line and continue with poor choices, or we can grow and kind of expand our understanding of the world.
And is this a bit of you mentioned their love, and I think you mentioned fear. Is this almost a battle between love and fear? When you talk about self-interest, and I think about companies taking over, utilizing, increasing shareholder value all the time by eating up more and more of the world's resources. I think about people who are maybe running companies earning several hundred times the average of an employer. These things all seem linked to a fear-based approach rather than an approach which is about love and the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Our whole reality is representative of the struggle between, you might say, good and evil, but it isn't really that. It's between fear and love. That is the key struggle. And that struggle has always been kind of at the core of our life. I mean, look at our literature, look at our movies, look at our, the things that, our plays, look at our output in our art. It almost all centers about this struggle between fear and love. We say good and evil, but it's not really that. It's fear and love are the more fundamental attributes of it. And that's important. And as our choices are made because of the fear, if the fear is making our choices, then the results of those choices turn out to hurt us. They turn out to bite us. They become problematic, not only for us, but for everybody. You see, we're all connected, and the choices we make don't just affect ourselves, they affect other people. And those other people then affect other people. So everything we do has this ripple effect that goes out into this larger world. And that's why we need this bigger picture of this larger world so we can appreciate the consequences, not just the intended consequences, but the unintended consequences as well. The things that most people don't think about. So yes, this fear versus love is the central ethical struggle that goes on in business, in art, in family, in personal relationships. It's the basic dynamic. And that's what it means to be human, is to be a part of the struggle.
And is there a key to, we'll ask you what consciousness means to you. I think it'd be great to define it, but is this accessing more love and less fear one of the keys to elevating consciousness?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As you make choices out of fear, you change yourself. And you make choices out of love, you change yourself. The choices you make are part of your growing process, part of your evolution. The choices we make now turn us into something else. What were we before the choice and what are we after the choice? Choices change us just by a little bit. And if those choices are based on fear, they move us in a negative direction. One where we struggle, one where we feel pain, one where we are, focused on self as opposed to focused on other. So the other choice is to make choices toward love. As we do that, our life becomes more happy. We find that happiness. You don't need a PhD in happiness. You just become happy because you are making your choices based on caring, on compassion, on cooperation. It's what can I give, not what can I take? What's in it for me? It's how can I help? So those two different attitudes will make the difference between a life lived in a small reality that is full of fear and pain and discomfort and negativity, and one that's lived with joy and happiness and feeling appreciated and satisfied. That's what happens when you make your choices based on love. So yes, that is the big difference between real success and only material success. Material success can be from either one of those two sets of choices, but real success is a success as a human being, not just a success in business. And for that, you need to care. You need to have a bigger picture.
Isn't that important? And is that the key? You talked about ripples, and is that the key, that we all need to consider those qualities to help us make a positive ripple on this situation while we're there and help us move collectively, individually towards solutions?
Yes, that is the key. And that's actually why we're here. That kind of brings up another big part that we could talk about for probably more than the rest of the show, but we're here for a purpose. And that purpose is for us to evolve our quality. Okay, now I put that in more specific terms of evolve the quality of our consciousness, but that's just using different words to say the same thing. It evolves our quality as a person. And that's why this physical reality, this physical universe exists. It exists for a purpose. It didn't just come out of this ball of plasma that came from nowhere. It was part of of consciousness, of the consciousness system, setting up a virtual reality for us to experience in, for us to make choices in, and by that, modify the quality of our consciousness, evolve the quality of our consciousness. So in my worldview, consciousness is fundamental. It's the fundamental thing. The physical reality is actually a derivative, a virtual reality created by consciousness. Now, a lot of people will find that to be a little strange. That's kind of off the charts as far as commonly accepted ideas. But from that viewpoint is where we get to solve all these paradoxes and derive a better physics. So it does better physics. That is a good sign that it has credibility if you can improve the nature of a science like physics.
I think in your book, you express a number of times a statement that's stuck in my mind, which is the quality of your being expresses the correctness of your understanding. Is the understanding about understanding this bigger picture and these concepts around love and
yes,
being and who you're being?
You see, when you understand that, then you understand, who am I? Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? And having good, solid, logical answers to those questions is what then can orient you toward what I would call true success. Again, success as a person, success as an individuated unit of consciousness, success as a human being, if you will. So yes, that's the key thing. It's why we're here.
Wow! And what we've got, the world and this system that we're part of it is continuously driving itself to improve and get more efficient. And you've got a technological background. And it just feels that everything is accelerating and technology is accelerating. You were doing that in your kind of career with technology and taking that thinking further. Can it keep on going faster and faster? And that's another dynamic, isn't it? That can it can identify the keys to solving these problems like climate change, but also it can be very destructive as well, can't it? It feels like it's taking on a life of its own.
Yes, well, technology is evolving. Technology will continue to evolve. And this idea that we can somehow stop that, process of evolution and or even slow it down really doesn't work. You can't stop it. You can't slow it down. As long as technology creates things that are useful to people, people will further the technology and they will use those things. Now, whether we have the wisdom to use that technology wisely, that's another thing. So the big race here isn't one technology against the other. It's technology against our wisdom. So if our technology gets, let's say, more destructive, has the potential to be more destructive than our wisdom to use it, then we're in big trouble as a race and even as a planet. So that's the race that matters, is whether or not our wisdom can grow sufficiently to make good use of our technology. Technology is neither here nor there. Technology isn't moral or immoral. It just is. It's what people do with it that makes it moral or immoral, ethical or unethical. And that's the choice of people. And if they make the choice to the side of cooperation and caring and the love side, then what they do with that technology is going to be wonderful and helpful. Because if it isn't, they wouldn't do it. On the other hand, if it's all about, what can I get out of it? How's it good for me? How can I make money from this? And has no idea about the effects that it has, all those unintended consequences that may come and bite us later. If we're looking at it from a small reality and a small sense of who and what we are, then we tend to make very poor decisions. And then we have to deal with the consequences of those decisions, like we're doing now with the global warming, or with the fact that we could, blow up the entire world with nuclear fusion bombs, or that, we could pollute ourselves, into extinction by poisoning the environment. We have all sorts of ways that our poor choices can do us all in. So yes, the key thing is to have that wisdom. That wisdom only comes from a bigger picture. And the bigger picture only comes from really understanding who you are, why you're here, what's the nature of our reality and what's our place in it.
And do you think, Tom, I think your book expresses that there's a personal journey in here, isn't there? There's to work on ourselves individually, but then there's a lot of people that need to find this bigger picture. And how do we do that in time?
Well, the first step is to be aware that we need to find that bigger picture.
Yeah.
You'll never find it until you come to the conclusion that it's something that you can do. And that bigger picture actually reveals itself and kind of unfolds in front of you as you explore inner space. It's about being. It's not about doing. It's about understanding. So often where people start is meditation. Meditation tends to be the beginning place of exploring inner space. It's the launch pad. So I would suggest that people start there if they want to grow in that direction. But it's just a matter of letting go of beliefs, letting go of fear. That is another way to approach it. Look at your life and say, if anything in my life is negative, do I get upset? Do I argue? Do I get angry? Do I get annoyed? Do I have stress? Do I feel not appreciated? You look at all these negative things. And if you have any of those negative things, that's because you have fear. You only have those because of fear. And if you can get rid of that fear and you can get rid of those beliefs, then, well, you've done it. What's left is you as love. It's the fear and the beliefs, the ego that drags us down. So we just need to have an intent to grow up, an intent to find a bigger picture, an intent to find our purpose and why we're here. And you'll find it if you have that intent. One thing will lead to another and lead to another. But meditation is a good place to get acquainted with your own consciousness. All of these things are really the properties, the attributes of consciousness that we're talking about. And understanding that should be a critical part of your life. You should be driven to understand those kinds of questions. Yes, they do have answers. And they have scientific answers. They have logical answers, not just metaphysical answers and not just belief-based answers. So look for the science. It's there.
And this whole aspect of meditation, I think when we come to the next show, we maybe talk a bit more about that. But it's something I have been practicing much more consistently since I've been reading your book. And I've been quite surprised by, I can have meetings coming up and I just almost allow this process to be my guide. And it's uncanny what it unearths. And when I go to my meeting and then ask about and find it's, hit the nub on the head, there's something through that process, isn't there, which reveals answers. I found that I couldn't find through a more linear sitting down with a piece of paper.
Absolutely. Well, these ideas that we find here that we're talking about, they also are the same core ideas that business people have. Let's get this a little bit back to business, because after all, this is a program on business. Yeah. Business requires a bigger picture, right? If you're in charge, then it's not just about the nuts and bolts and, getting the mail and filling orders. You need to have a plan. You need to have strategic thinking as well as tactical thinking. You need to see big pictures. So a successful businessman needs to cultivate big picture thinking, right? He needs to not only be concerned with the what and the possibilities of how, but also the quality of the why. Why are we doing this? And what effects will it have on others? And also, business is about people, right? Businesses are people. That includes the owners, the executives, the customers, the employees. They're all people. So if you have a real good fundamental understanding of people and what makes them tick and why they make the choices they make, then that will be much better for business. So fundamentally understanding people and caring about people, having a big picture, are two things that business needs critically. And the third thing business needs is to develop its intuition. Okay, to make that intuition to be as accurate and reliable as it can be. And it can be very accurate and reliable. A lot of business decisions come down to intuition. What are those markets going to do? What are those customers going to do? What's going to happen in the future? Well, you can't read a crystal ball and see what's happening in the future, but you can understand the possibilities and you can understand the probability of each possibility. And that information is available to your intuition. So those are three things: the big picture, the understanding people at a fundamental level, and developing your intuition, that are all really at the heart of my work. And those are the things that business people need more than anything else. So this is about business and good for business.
I think you've just summarized beautifully what we're going to talk about on our next show with you on the 25th of September. Tom, we've got to leave it there. Absolutely fascinating. I've loved talking with you. I'm buzzing at the moment, thinking about all the things we've spoken about today. And I just want to share a few links for people. If you want to find out a bit more about Tom's experiments, you can go to cusac.org, cusac.org. If you want to find out, there's lots of resources at my-big-toe.com. That's my-big-toe.com. And you can Google on YouTube Tom's interviews with the likes of Bruce Lipton, and there's a lot of content on there. Tom's very generous at giving away free content. But we're back again on the 25th of September with Tom. On next week's show, we have Celine Marin. We're going to be talking about your health and vibrancy and energy and well-being next week. But Tom, fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. It's been my pleasure, and I look forward to doing this again.
Excellent. Thank you. Everybody, take care. Go away and think about your consciousness.
We thank you for listening to the Chris Cooper Business Elevation Show. Please join your host, Chris Cooper, again next Friday at 8 a.m. US Pacific Time on the Voice America Business Channel. Be more. Achieve more.